All right, guys, we're going to look at the 1920 society today. So this is kind of session 3 in Unit 5. All right, so we're going to talk about some major shifts in society during the 1920s. Okay, so when we talk about the 1920s, we talk about it as the Roaring Twenties or the Jazz Age. Okay, so music is going to be a big part of the 1920s. Okay, we also see the nickname for women become flappers during this time period. Okay, so women begin wearing makeup, they wear shorter skirts, they smoke cigarettes, big changes. We also see writers, F. Scott Fitzgerald, which I know most of you read The Great Gatsby this year. Ernest Hemingway is very famous during this time period. And then again, like we saw coming out of the Harlem Renaissance, musicians like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington come out. Okay, famous jazz musicians during this time period. Okay, and a lot of the literature of the 1920s is going to come out of kind of what we experienced and what we learned in World War I. Okay, when we look at Sinclair Lewis, he's talking about kind of life in America. F. Scott Fitzgerald's about the Great Gatsby's. And he's actually highlighting life in the 1920s, as you've probably seen from the movie Great Gatsby's or by reading the book. Ernest Hemingway, his writing often reflected kind of that post-World War I or life during World War I. Okay. During this time period, because a lot of things are changing, we see a lot of clash in ideas, in beliefs. And a big thing, we're going to see this idea of fundamentalism, where this idea where you literally believe a strict interpretation of the Bible, word for word, the Bible is accurate, versus new ideas and the teaching of evolution. Okay, so that idea of natural selection is being taught in this time, and it kind of bumps head with these kind of strict religious people. Okay, this conflict between these two ideas, fundamentalism versus evolution, kind of comes to a head when it talks about the Scopes trial. This is going to be nicknamed the monkey trial. Okay, and we see this idea of science versus religion, evolution versus creationism. Okay, so did the world evolve or was it created by God? Okay, so the main conflict is going to happen in Dayton, Tennessee. Okay, and kind of the main character that we're going to see out of this and what the trial is named after is going to be John Scopes. He teaches high school biology. Okay, and there's a law in Dayton, Tennessee that said that you could not teach evolution. So again, he intentionally and specifically breaks that law and teaches about evolution. Okay, so he breaks the law. Okay, he teaches evolution in his class. The word gets out. He is going to be arrested and put on trial. And when this trial happens, it's going to be a very, very public event. Okay, literally people were selling popcorn outside of the courtroom, and it was literally turned into be almost like a circus event. Okay, so very chaotic, very publicized, because it's bringing these two widely separate ideas coming to head in this trial. Okay, so we see this kind of cartoon in the bottom left corner. Okay, so when in regards to evolution, you see how they're using monkeys. The idea of the evolution of monkeys and how man might have evolved from monkeys. But in regards to evolution, when we're talking about Dayton, Tennessee, you shouldn't speak about evolution. You shouldn't listen to anything about evolution. And we're not going to see or take in anything about evolution. Okay, so again, this trial, again, goes on for a long time, very public. Scopes is convicted, so he did break that law. And all of that, you know, he purposely breaks the law, all of that, he's going to have to pay a fine of $100. Okay? But really, the big change that is going to come out of this is education is going to be debated. Is this accurate? Should this be allowed to be taught? And that law is actually going to stay in place where you could not teach about evolution until the 1960s. Okay, the 1920s is also known as the Roaring Twenties. And we see this big emphasis on the consumer economy, okay? People were buying things, okay? Lots of things and things that they didn't necessarily have the money for. Okay, so you see the Whirlpool washer. So imagine you washing your clothes, and then you see kind of the crank where you could wring them out up there. You see a nice new oven and stovetop over here. Black & Decker tools. We see a toaster down here. A little iron waffle maker. The regular iron. New refrigerator, which is very new in the 1920s. A telephone for your home. All right, so in the 1920s, okay, lots of new things, and you wanted to be like everybody else and have everything that everybody else had. In a way that you could do this without, necessarily having the money up front is going to be through installment purchasing. So literally think about almost like layaway or a payment plan. You were able to purchase more things that you didn't necessarily immediately have the money for. So you put a certain amount of money down, and then you make payments on it. Okay, so more people are able to purchase things. But it's not going to be regulated. Okay, again, I'm not going to just hand out money to you guys unless I know that you have a job or some way to pay back. But this wasn't being regulated back then. Okay, you could not have a job and take out a loan to buy a car and then realize, oh, I don't actually have any money to pay it back. So easy credit, it's not being regulated. This is going to lead to some trouble. So yes, it's really nice and cool that we have credit and we're able to buy things that we don't immediately have the money for until it gets us into some trouble financially. Okay, one of the things that people are buying is the Model T. We talked about that in the Industrial Revolution. This is going to be the first mass-produced car in the United States. Again, this is kind of the American dream, owning Model T. Most people were able to afford it. And again, this idea of the Model T and the assembly line, this was produced in a similar fashion in a lot of other industries. Okay, it's going to change the way people live. They have easier access to traveling. They're getting around more. They can live outside of the cities. Okay, another big change of the 1920s is going to be the way that we get information. Okay. Prior to the 1920s, we mostly could rely on newspapers for our information. So remember yellow journalism, when we talked about this exaggerated things, or when we talked about the journalist prior to World War I. Excuse me. Okay, in the 1920s, the big shift is going to be the radio. Okay. Again, similar to what we would talk about, like everybody has at least one in their house as far as a TV in today's society. The radio is going to be that source of information. So you see a lot of the radio stations of this time period eventually become the TV stations that we know today. So radio is going to be a big shift. We get our news this way. We get up-to-date information this way. And we also see the first motion pictures kind of come out and become important. At this point, they are silent movies, so we see famous people like Charlie Chaplin. Eventually, we get some sound as the talkies. And then Al Jolson and Mary Pickford become kind of these first movie stars and celebrities. Okay, another thing is we see kind of sports stars. So celebrities through movies and through radios become these people that we want to follow. And then the radio also allows us to follow sports that we can't necessarily see. Okay, so two big things that I need to know and to connect that allowed celebrities to come out is large city populations. Okay, so think about where these major sports teams come about. They're all major cities. And then the radio, allowing people to follow up to them without having to be in attendance. This allows celebrities to form. So like Babe Ruth, Jack Dempsey, Ty Cobb. Okay, some other celebrities. So again, Jack Dempsey, he's a famous boxer. Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb are famous baseball players. Amelia Earhart, she makes waves as being the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, and we know later that she will disappear, and we do not firmly know what happened to her still today. She's the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, and then Charles Lindbergh in his plane, the Spirit of the St. Louis, he is the first person to make the trip by himself across the Atlantic Ocean. All right, so we talked about the flappers. So again, new style. So they're wearing shorter skirts. They also cut their hair into a bob. So short, about chin length. They began to wear makeup. This is a way of them kind of expressing themselves, changing style. And this also reflects kind of the more independent lifestyle that we see women were able to have. Okay, so because of World War I, women were able to increase jobs. We see that social acceptance and equality is big in this time period, as women were just given the right to vote. Okay, during this time period, so we talked about the 19th Amendment being passed. The 18th Amendment will also be passed during this time period. And again, kind of the goal with that was to reduce crime, reduce domestic abuse, reduce this idea of being an unproductive member of society. Okay, so 2/3 of the states are going to ratify it. It becomes an amendment, and it makes drinking illegal. It makes producing alcohol illegal. It makes selling alcohol illegal. The problem is, again, it was really kind of difficult to enforce. So a lot of people began to drink illegally. We kind of saw people produce alcohol on their own, and it wasn't really regulated or protected. We see secret nightclubs, secret bars, things like that come about. Okay, so bootleggers are going to be the specific name for people who transported and sold liquor illegally. They were making money on it. And again, this is kind of where the government begins to shift, because they were not making any taxable income off of this alcohol. And actually, the 18th Amendment leads to more crime, not less crime. So we begin to see kind of these gangsters like Al Capone organizing these bootleggers. Speakeasies were the illegal bars. So sometimes you would need a secret code to get into the club. So again, all of this was kind of going on even though it was outlawed. Okay, so eventually the government sees the error of their ways. The 21st Amendment is going to be passed, overturning the 18th Amendment and ending prohibition, making alcohol legal again. Also, when we see this, kind of just side note, not anything that you would have to know, but why we put the NASCAR here, this actually led to the creation of NASCAR, because these bootleggers would kind of soup up their cars so they could outrun police. So this is the first form of racing, and it turns into the sport that it is today. All right, easy peasy. That was session 3. Okay, so you need to do the second part of your primary documents in Google Classroom.